When you pick at the odd jobs corner of the biotech industry long enough, you eventually find something that's not just weird, but might actually rewrite your DNA. That's how I ended up taking a gig at an Oceanic research facility that was so top secret. The onboarding paperwork had more black bars than a redacted UFO document. It all started with a phone call from a guy named John. John had a voice as smooth and cool as polished glass, which should have been my first clue. Nobody real has a voice that sounds like they're perpetually narrating a car commercial. He laid out the job details, crazy hours, even crazier depth, 2 miles under the sea in some ultra-high-tech lab studying who knows what. The pay was unlike anything I'd seen, the kind of money that doesn't just whisper sweet nothings, it sings full-blown opera in your ear. I said yes. I still tell myself it was because of my adventurous spirit, but we both know it was the dollar signs. Big, flashing, life-changing dollar signs. The commute was something else. A helicopter to a nondescript platform in the middle of the ocean, then a claustrophobic descent in a capsule that vibrated like a tin, filled with angry bees. I remember pressing my nose against the small window, watching the sunlight fade to a twilight blue, and then to nothing at all. Just darkness outside, and the sound of my own breathing inside. When the capsule docked with a clank and hiss, the sort of sound you'd expect from an old sci-fi movie, a stocky woman with a clipboard greeted me. She introduced herself as Mara and had about as much patience as a cranky librarian at closing time. "Welcome to the abyss," she'd said, her tone suggesting she'd made this joke too often. It was funny, in a dry, expected way. I followed her through heavy metal doors, each one sealing behind us with a solemn finality. The facility was a maze of sterile corridors, each turn taking me deeper into the belly of a steel beast resting in inky darkness. Mara handed me a thin booklet that cracked when I bent it, titled Staff Conduct and Safety Guidelines. While walking, she rattled off various protocols, most of it going over my head as I nodded dumbly. That's when the strangeness started, the kind that sneaks up on you. Mara led me past a laboratory where a man sat, still as a statue, staring at a microscope. He didn't look up as we passed, completely absorbed or something else. The lights in that lab hummed a tune slightly off-key, a nauseating fluorescent flicker that didn't match the steady buzz in the hallway. Then there was the cafeteria, sparkling clean and empty, except for a single sandwich left precisely in the center of a sprawling table. Mara noted my puzzled look and muttered, "Timing of meals is irregular down here. Eat when you can." The sandwich seemed untouched, as if waiting for its diner to return any minute, but the lettuce poking out looked older, slightly discolored, as though it had been waiting a long while. Each peculiar detail piled up, tiny anomalies that tugged at the corners of my mind. By the time we reached my quarters, a room more functional than cozy, the unease had settled in. I thanked Mara, who offered a stiff nod before disappearing down the hall, her steps echoing a beat too long after she turned the corner. Left alone, I unpacked, the silence a stark contrast to the buzz and hum of the facility. It was then that I decided to sift through the safety manual more thoroughly. Most rules were what you'd expect in a high-pressure, deep-sea lab, but Rule 7 made me pause. During a yellow alert, do not look directly at any crew member. Use peripheral vision only. I uttered to nobody, flipping the page. The vagueness chewed at me. What was a yellow alert? I tossed the booklet aside. That's when I heard it, a low, droning sound pulsing through the walls. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, an audio illusion that seemed to creep beneath my skin. Standing still, I listened, a chill tracing my spine. Was this the sound of something normal, like the facility's generators, or the prelude to this so-called yellow alert? Shaking off the chill, I picked the booklet back up, flipping to the section about alerts, when a knock at my door startled me, 3 precise taps, firm and deliberate. Taking a deep breath, I walked over and opened it to find Mara on the other side, her face pale, eyes wide. "Come with me," she said, her voice low and urgent. "It's a yellow alert." With only the flickering light of the hallway illuminating her strained expression, we turned to rush towards the uncertainty, her previous humor nowhere to be seen. Mara grabbed my arm, pulling me down the dimly lit corridor with urgency. The overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows that danced on the walls like specters taunting us from the ether. I could feel every thud of my heart as we raced past doors that stood ominously closed, each one seeming to hide its own whispered secrets. "What's happening, Mara?" I managed to gasp out, stumbling slightly on a discarded magazine that lay like a trap in our path. "Just keep moving," she replied, not slowing her pace. Our steps echoed in the empty hallway, a hollow sound that filled me with a growing sense of dread. We reached the elevator, and she slammed the call button repeatedly, her fingers trembling. While we waited, Mara leaned close, her breath quick and scared. "It's the woods," she whispered. "Something coming out of them, something wrong." The forest surrounding our complex had always felt alive in a way that chilled me. It was too silent, too watchful. Now, hearing Mara's words, that sensation twisted in my gut. The elevator dinged, its doors sliding open reluctantly. We piled inside, and as the doors closed, I caught the briefest glimpse of movement at the end of the hallway. Just a shadow, perhaps, but my skin crawled at the sight. Mara pressed the button for the lobby, and as the elevator descended, the fluorescent light above us flickered more violently, plunging us into momentary darkness with each blink. I tried to control my breathing, to calm the panic that clawed at my insides. The elevator came to a halt, and the doors opened to reveal the lobby deserted, a stark contrast to its usual bustling nature. The only sound was the low hum of the emergency lighting. Mara didn't pause. She headed straight for the front doors. I followed, my feet heavy, every instinct screaming to turn back. Outside, the air was thick with an unseasonable mist that clung to my skin. We moved toward the tree line, the once familiar path now a foreign landscape veiled in fog. The ground was wet, mud clinging to my shoes, making each step a slog. There, Mara pointed toward a particular dense part of the woods. My eyes strained through the fog, and then I saw it, an unnatural, pulsating glow, faint but distinctly there. Without a word, we moved closer, our approach cautious. The glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat, growing brighter, then dimmer, a beacon of terror calling us forward. As we neared, the sound of the night seemed to fall away, replaced by a palpable silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We reached the clearing, the source of the glow now evident. A circle of stones, ancient and moss-covered, surrounded an altar of sorts, upon which lay a strangely iridescent mist that seemed to seep slowly outward like a living thing. The air around it was cold, and I could see my breath misting in front of me, even though it was midsummer. Mara reached out a hand toward the glow, mesmerized or mad. I couldn't tell which. "Don't," I said sharply, grabbing her arm. But as my fingers closed around her wrist, the world seemed to warp. The ground beneath my feet tilted, and the trees swayed as if drunk, their branches twisting grotesquely. We stumbled backward as the mist began to spill faster from the altar, reaching toward us like fingers of ice. Mara screamed, a sharp, slicing sound that jolted me out of my stupor. Together, we turned and ran, the fog swallowing our frantic steps, the pulsating glow now a warning beacon left behind. Panting, our backs against the safety of Mara's apartment door, we slid to the floor, eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice barely carrying. Mara shook her head, her eyes haunted. "I don't know, but it's been stirring for days. That's why it was a yellow alert. they're deciding if it should escalate. As we sat in strained silence, the faintest sound broke through, the eerie, undeniable sound of a child's laughter, echoing down the hallway, playful and sinister. And though we were inside, secure behind locked doors, a chilling breeze swept through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of the forest at night. That realization settled heavily between us. Whatever was happening, it was already too close. As the laughter faded into a susurrus of unsettling whispers, Sarah, my childhood friend who had been stonily silent till then, clenched her fists tightly. Her eyes darted towards the shadow-draped corner of the room where the walls met, a place where light seemed unwilling to touch. "Did you hear that too?" she asked, her voice a whisper-thin shell of its usual timbre. I nodded, unable to form words, my throat tight with an unspoken fear. It was all becoming too much. The laughter, the cold, the scent of the forest. It was as if the outside had invaded our inside, blurring the sanctity of what we called home. Sarah slowly stood up, her movements stiff as if she expected something, or someone, to jump out at any moment. I followed suit, my legs unsteady. Together, we moved towards the hallway, our steps hesitant and soundless. The corridor stretched before us, dimly lit by the failing light of an overhead bulb that flickered as if it, too, was afraid. We had barely taken a few steps when a cold draft hit us, strange. Than before. The windows were closed, all of them. I had checked twice before sunset. The logical part of my brain screamed that it was just a technical issue, but the tightening in my gut knew better. Sarah paused, her hand reaching out to grip my arm. "Do you feel that?" she hissed, her eyes wide and searching. The temperature had dropped, and with it, the eerie scent of pine and damp earth grew stronger, as if the forest floor had risen to meet our feet. "I do," I managed, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Something's not right." We pushed forward, propelled by a mix of fear and the need to understand what was encroaching upon our safe haven. The laughter had ceased, replaced now by a silence so dense it was almost tangible. But then, as we neared the end of the hallway, a soft creak sounded from the old oak door that led to my study. Sarah and I froze, our eyes fixed on the slowly opening door. The gap widened just enough to let the dim light reveal bits and pieces of the chaos within, papers strewn about, bookshelves emptied haphazardly. But more troubling than the mess was the shadow that seemed to linger just beyond the edge of light, shapeless and ominous. Sarah squeezed my arm, her nails digging in. "We shouldn't go in there," she whispered, terror lacing her words. But I couldn't heed her warning. Something pulled at me, a force both foreign and intimately familiar, like a thread tethered to my very soul, drawing me towards the darkness. My feet moved of their own accord, stepping into the cold embrace of the room. The door swung shut behind us with a resolute thud, plunging us into near darkness, save for the silvery moonlight that fought its way through the grime-streaked window. The shape in the room seemed to pulse with a life of its own, expanding and contracting like a breath. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sterner than I felt. No answer came, but the air shifted, as if displaced by someone or something moving. A soft, heart-wrenching sob filled the room, echoing off the walls, drowning in its own despair. My heart raced. It was the sound of a child crying, lost and afraid. "Please, we want to help you," Sarah said, stepping beside me, her earlier reservations overtaken by concern. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, menacing growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The room grew colder, if possible, and the smell of the forest turned sharp, like freshly turned soil on a grave. "We need to leave," I said, suddenly clear-headed. The fear that gripped me was no longer just for our safety, but for our souls. We turned towards the door, only to find it wouldn't budge. As we struggled, a faint glow emanated from the center of the room, growing brighter by the second. Unable to look away, we watched as the shape began to form, a tall, slender figure, its features blurred, but its intent horrifyingly clear. It moved towards us, slow and deliberate, as the room filled with the deafening silence of a tomb. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, but we were trapped, caught in the gaze of something that should not exist. Just as it reached us, the light bulb in the hallway buzzed back to life, flooding the room with light through the open door. We looked around, breathless, the figure gone as if it had never been. But the room was still cold, the scent of the forest still hung heavy in the air, and somewhere, distantly, the child's laughter began anew, as if taunting us, reminding us that this was not over. The whisper of that childlike giggle echoed off the shadow-draped walls, sending a chill deeper than the lingering autumn cold threading through the cracks beneath doors and windows. I drew my cardigan tighter around me, each rustle of fabric sounding unreasonably loud in the quiet that had settled back down like dust after a storm. Sandy, who had been trying to rationalize the unsettling events since we first heard the disembodied laughter, finally fell silent. Her eyes were large, her usual academic assuredness washed out by the stark fear, now evident in her jittery movements. "It's just kids fooling around outside, right?" she ventured once more, her voice a fluttering note that failed to convince either of us. "I don't think kids would be out in the forest this late, not with the fog rolling in like this." My response seemed to hang between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to explore. We both looked instinctively toward the window, where a creeping fog pressed silently against the glass, obscuring the normal view of gnarled trees and scattering leaves with an eerie, formless white. Feeling claustrophobic, I suggested we check the perimeter of the house, a course of action I hoped would dispel our fears as simple, overactive imaginations spurred by the setting and atmosphere of this old cabin. With each step, the floorboards creaked underfoot as though groaning in protest, and the sound of our uneven breathing was too loud in my ears. As we made our cautious way through the narrow, dimly lit hallways, the air grew inexplicably colder, a silent testament to our growing unease. Sandy's hand gripped my arm, her nails digging slightly into my skin through the heavy fabric of my sleeve. The laughter came again, closer this time, a joyous sound that no longer held any joy for us. It was coming from the basement. A chill ran down my spine, the one place we had avoided since our arrival. The door, which I could have sworn was closed tight only hours before, now stood ajar, inviting us with an ominous, silent beckoning. With a shared look that conveyed a depth of reluctance, we edged towards it, the old wooden steps groaning as we descended into the shadows. The air grew thick, musty with disuse and something else, an underlying taint that was sweet and rotting. Reaching the bottom, we found old, rusted tools hanging from pegs on the walls, their long shadows thrown by the single, flickering bulb overhead. Cobwebs draped like dirty lace over stacks of yellowing newspapers and books. That laughter echoed around us again, bouncing off concrete walls, and now accompanied by the soft whisper of feet shuffling. We turned in unison towards the source, our flashlights cutting through the darkness to reveal a hollow in the far wall, a gap between two large metal shelves. Hesitantly, moving as if in a dream, I stepped closer, shining my light into the dark recess. There, nestled among broken toys and ancient, dusty furniture, was the huddled figure of a child. My heart seized, but it was only a doll, its once bright clothing faded and stained, eyes glassy and staring. Yet, as we stood there, the atmosphere palpable with something unspoken, the doll's cracked lips seemed to twitch, curling up in what could only be described as a grin. Sandy stumbled back with a gasp, her beam of light trembling violently. "This isn't right, this is all wrong," she muttered to herself, a mantra against the creeping dread. My own light wavered as a cold draft swept through the small, cramped room, carrying a whisper like a suggestion. Stay with us, play with us. Panicking, we fled upstairs, the echo of that sinister invitation chasing us, intertwining with the child's laughter that now seemed to seep from the very walls of the cabin. Back in the living room, we huddled by the feeble warmth of the dying fire, the laughter ominously quiet. I tried to focus on the reality that this was just an old house, just old fears, nothing more. But as I reached to stoke the fire, my hand stilled. Amidst the ashes, something small, charred, but unmistakably, a child's finger bone lay partially unveiled. We couldn't leave that night, trapped by the impenetrable fog. Neither of us slept, each jump at the softest creak, every shadow seeming alive with malice. The realization that something had been living with us, unseen yet palpably monstrous in its childlike guise, was a nightmare far too visceral and immediate. As the night stretched interminably towards the bleak suggestion of dawn, Sandy whispered with a quavering disbelief, "It's in the house, isn't it? It's been here all along, hasn't it?" And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the flickering firelight, the silhouette of small, hunched shoulders and the too-wide grin of a doll confirmed our worst fears.